poll of more than 1,600 barristers found 9 out of 10 are prepared to take industrial action in protest at changes to legal aid, cuts in the legal aid bill and cuts in their fees. So are you a criminal barrister who would consider going on strike? 0500 909 693. Max Hill QC is chairman of the Criminal Bar Association. He's accusing the government of being prepared to settle for what he calls cheap, partial justice, while trying to con the public into believing that greedy lawyers are to blame. He's to make a speech at the association's annual dinner in London tonight, and this morning he told the BBC why he's going to do so.
We've been surveying our membership, and that shows that the average hard-working, medium-earning barrister has had enough of being undervalued and frankly forgotten. Let's just imagine a future world, which this government wants, where small groups of lawyers make financial bids for criminal cases in which ordinary people risk lengthy terms of imprisonment. Is that what we want? It seems that's what the government is intent on introducing, and if it falls to us to bring people to their senses in the public interest, that's what we'll do.
He also added that the perception, he also talked, I beg your pardon, about the perception that barristers are fat cats. He says, contrary to what people might think, barristers, like everyone else, worry about how they're going to pay their mortgage.
In a case in which a defendant, as is his right, chooses trial by members of the public and then subsequently decides, because further evidence is served, that he must and does plead guilty, then his advocate, his barrister, will receive a one-off fixed fee of £203. And that barrister may have gone to court and represented that client for as many as 4 or sometimes 5 appearances. Total fee, £203. We should just rid our minds of the old image of Rumpole, and we should think in terms of hundreds, not thousands, and certainly not tens of thousands of pounds. The government loves to talk about the very few at the top, very few who earn in 6 figures. The vast majority are not even reaching mid-5 figures, so let's say £50,000, and let's remember that that is not a salary. Well, you've got to pay for chambers, you've got to pay for a pension. We may be public servants, but we have no public pensions.
So what's the background to the barristers' concerns? Here's legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg.
The concern is that if there isn't money spent on legal aid, there won't be money to pay barristers, and people facing criminal charges won't be properly defended. They may not be properly prosecuted either, and that will lead to further miscarriages of justice. There isn't money for young barristers to cut their teeth doing straightforward cases. There isn't money for defendants, and there is concern that people will be without recourse to the law. And what Max Hill, the Criminal Bar Association chairman, is pointing out is that the sort of people who do criminal work, at least the vast majority of them, don't get paid very much. By the time they've spent money travelling around the country to Crown courts defending people, they get very little from the public purse. These people are simply going to stop doing legal aid work because they're not going to be paid for it. And in the end, there won't be lawyers to go around and people will not get justice.
There are a number of barristers, I've spoken to some, I'm sure you have as well, who say these cuts, putting aside the fact that their fees have been frozen and then cut at various points, these cuts from the Ministry of Justice, it's cuts of 350 million out of the Ministry of Justice's annual civil legal aid budget, are already having a direct impact on justice. They talk about hardly any cases being put through to them from the CPS. They talk about alleged criminals being charged with more minor offences so they can be dealt with in a magistrate's court rather than going to a Crown court, which will be cheaper. Are you hearing experiences like that?
All that is true, and the other great concern among barristers, who are the specialist lawyers who traditionally have appeared in court representing clients, is that solicitors' firms, who are also suffering from cuts, are keeping the work in-house. They're getting solicitor advocates, they're getting employed barristers to do work that would otherwise have been sent out to freelance barristers, as it were. Now, you can understand why solicitors are doing that. They have a much lower fee per case, and if they can keep the work in-house, they get paid for the paperwork and they get paid for appearing in court, and they can just about make a living through economies of scale. That's not something that the barristers can do, and it means that there isn't work for young barristers. There won't be a new generation of barristers getting the experience they need. People will simply give up doing criminal work. Not that there's much else work at the lower end of the bar for anybody except people who specialise in commercial cases, which are obviously better paid.
On the other hand, there are inefficiencies, and we all know about them. People not turning up on the right day for court cases, bundles of papers being missing, general incompetence from when a lot of people are involved in a particular case. I'm not sure that the reforms will necessarily remove all that incompetence, but do you think that that's a fair criticism as well?
Well, it is a fair criticism, but it's not necessarily a fair criticism of the barristers concerned. Often those criticisms are directed at the prosecutors, at the Crown Prosecution Service, because cuts in their staff have meant that they find it harder and harder to handle large quantities of complicated paperwork. Indeed, for years there's been a perception that prosecutors come into court with a pile of minor cases and they're really unprepared. The problem, of course, is that if you're a defence barrister and you turn up in court, it may be some different part of the country, and the prosecution isn't ready, well, you, the defence barrister, are not going to be paid very much, if at all, if you turn up and the case doesn't go ahead.
The legal aid bill in this country is something like £2 billion a year. We in the UK pay far more per head than most other countries for legal aid. I mean, why is that?
Well, because more work is done by lawyers in private practice than in other countries. Where you have different systems, the continental system, much more work is done, for example, by an examining magistrate rather than work done by defence lawyers and prosecution lawyers. So the money is spent in different ways. I think the lawyers will accept that efficiencies have to be made and cuts are necessary. The problem they have is that the legislation that went through was not amended in the way that the lawyers said was necessary. Now, obviously, it's up to the government to decide, not the lawyers. But the lawyers say that they're the people who are actually working at the sharp end. They know how things work. And really, their expertise is something the government might have taken into account. They are genuinely concerned for their members. They've been talking about this for some time. And although the government says, well, strikes solve nothing, they obviously feel very strongly that they've got to get their message over to the public that they're not rumpole, they're not fat cats, they're not people who are simply out for themselves. They want to make a living like everybody else. They don't earn very much money, and they fear that if their services disappear, as will eventually happen if we carry on down this road, people will suffer and justice will not be done.
Can you imagine a strike by members of the Criminal Bar Association?
We got very close to a strike beforehand. Barristers, perhaps more than everybody else, have to obey the law. And of course, to call a strike these days, you have to have a proper ballot, you have to give notice, and so on. And so the last time this was talked about, they hadn't set up a ballot, and all that they could do was to invite individual barristers to consider how they were placed. And there were times when lawyers withdrew from cases and there was a little bit of difficulty. We've not had a formal strike with a formal strike ballot yet, but I think that a lot of barristers are angry, and you know how people say when they think they're going on strike, they've got nothing to lose, they're not getting very much money anyway, and they hope that this will make an impact. The problem, of course, is that cases will be delayed, and justice delayed is justice denied. The real fear is that individuals are going to have to defend themselves in court, and although miscarriages of justice, as we've seen recently, can happen even if both sides are properly represented by barristers, there's no doubt that if people are badly advised, cases are more likely to go wrong, and it costs much more money further down the line to put them right.
Legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg will talk to various criminal barristers in a moment. If you're listening to this, you work in the criminal justice system. Tell us what impact the cuts are having on justice. Tell us what you think about the changes. Tell us what you think about the prospect of criminal barristers balloting for strike action. 0500 909 693. Text 85058. Let's have a bit of travel at 10:15. Here's Michelle.
Thank you, Victoria. We'll start with the M42 southbound, where there's delays between junctions 8 and 7, where it meets the M6. That's because of an accident. There is a lane closure in place at the moment, which is causing congestion back to junction 9. Elsewhere, the M60 Barton Bridge anti-clockwise. They've managed to move the broken down lorry now. They did that just after 9:45. Still left congestion though going back to East Lancs Road at junction 14 and back on the M61 to junction 2. The M62 has reopened in both directions. The police incident is over at junction 9 at Winwick and traffic is getting back to normal. Clockwise on the M25, coming off on the exit slip road at junction 25 for the A10. A broken down vehicle is blocking one lane and slowing things down. The A720 Edinburgh City bypass westbound at the Straighton junction due to an earlier accident. Still delays of around about 20 minutes at the moment going back to Old Dalkeith Road. And good news in Puckeridge, the A10 northbound at Brothing roundabout has now reopened following an earlier overturned vehicle. Michelle Dignan, 5 Live Travel.
Shakespeare Unlocked.
On BBC Two, a search for the best young Shakespearean actors.
Shakespeare's language is of our time as well as the Elizabethan time.
Once more into the breach, dear friends, once more.
We're looking for passion, eloquence.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
The language that's the most glorious thing ever done in English.
But soft, what light through yonder window breaks.
How does one man continue to inspire so many? Off by Heart Shakespeare, this Saturday at 9 on BBC Two.
Let's talk to Claire Dowes, criminal barrister at the London Chambers, and Philip Katz, QC, criminal barrister also in London. Hello, both of you.
Hello.
Claire Dowes, would you consider voting to go on strike?
I've certainly already voted in the CBA poll that I would be willing to withdraw my labour, if I can put it that way, if it came to it, yes.
And what effect do you hope that would have?
Well, I think we've got to the stage where criminal barristers have to make members of the public understand exactly the position that we've been put in with the cuts, not only that have come in recently, but in the 3 to 4 years prior to these new cuts, we've already been subject to cuts of 13.5% in total on our fees. And with the talk about the government restructuring the way the criminal justice service is purchased effectively, it's going to basically make it uneconomic for quite a number of people to continue practicing at all.
Philip Katz, are the cuts already having a direct impact on justice? And if so, can you give us some examples?
Well, I think it's important to bear in mind that these cuts are not just being applied to defence lawyers. They are across the board. They include prosecution fees. And I don't think the public always realises that barristers in crime very often one day prosecute, the next day they defend. So we're not devils one day and angels the next. And the effect is very serious, yes. First of all, I was head of chambers for about 4 years in a big London criminal set. We have had a number of young people about the age of wanting to start families, simply unable to afford to continue living in London. They've gone back out into the provinces where they may have family support because there's simply no hope of them being able to settle down and start a family. We have seen a huge cut in the number of pupilages available to youngsters who want to come to this side of the bar. And my own set, for instance, cut the number of pupilages we offered, funded pupilages, which is money comes out of our pockets. It's not payable in any other way, and we've halved the number of pupilages, and around the country the number of entrants into the profession is being drastically reduced because people can't afford to pay for entrance. This will have a huge impact on the future of this profession, which historically has been the envy of the world.
In what way? How will it impact on defendants and victims?
If you stop people, it's always been a vocational side of the bar. This is not fat cat work. This is always been fixed rates, which haven't increased since '97. They've only been cut. And if you basically send the message out, you're not even going to be able to count on earning a reasonable living. You're telling everybody in the future, don't bother doing legally aided work. You will not be able to afford it. And that means that further down the line, your profession will shrink. It will drive people into any other avenue but working in publicly funded work, which is bound to have an impact if bright people who always accepted lower fees than they could obtain in the true market on the commercial side, if those bright people go elsewhere, you're just cutting the profession off at its knees.
Are solicitors not bright enough to prosecute or defend?
Of course they are, and they still do. And one of the unwelcome effects of all of this is setting solicitors and barristers at each other's throats, fighting over money, whereas before this programme of cuts really got underway, they were all able to work together in the secure knowledge they were getting reasonable rates for what they did. It's not a question of solicitors not being able to do it or barristers not being able to do it, but the general tradition has been, and it's worked extremely well, that once you get really serious cases that go to the Crown Court, jury trials, even now the overwhelming majority of those cases are conducted by barristers who are trained in that sort of advocacy from day one.
Claire Dowes, you will perhaps expect not a lot of sympathy. I'll just read you one text. There is a theme, though. It's referring to what Max Hill QC said in one of the clips we played. 50k a year and no pension. Oh, the horror. That's how people feel.
Yes, I realise that, but I don't think that they realise that we're not salaried. I think there's a general perception amongst the public that legally funded barristers' work is somehow salaried. It's not. If I received gross per year £50,000, I would then have to pay my tax out of that. I would then have to pay my chamber's expenses, which is effectively my office costs after that, which is, generally speaking, on average at the criminal bar around 15%. I have to pay all my own travel. I have to fund that up front before I get paid. I have to pay all my business expenses, all my professional training course expenses that you have to keep up with professional training points. All of that has to come out of my pocket. And one of the other problems for criminal barristers is that actually getting paid is the responsibility of a government department, the Legal Services Commission, who seem wholly unable to pay barristers properly, submitting bills on time and accurately within about 4 months. It's 3 to 4 months before you can expect to get paid after you've finished a case. And that's a case that you may well have had to spend 9 months doing preparation and preparatory hearings on before a trial.
Philip Katz, have you come across or have you heard anecdotally about individuals who are being charged with offences that can be dealt with in a magistrate's court when actually the evidence would suggest that they should be charged with something more serious, but they're being charged with a more minor offence so it doesn't go to Crown Court, which is more expensive?
Yes, well, I mean, my practice doesn't keep me in the magistrate's court these days, but from the younger members of chambers, there are, I think it would be fair to call it more than anecdotal evidence. There's pretty daily evidence that there is a perception that charging is kept very low. If there is any conceivable way of charging so that the case is kept in the magistrate's court where it's cheaper, then that happens. I'm not saying that decisions are made which are improper, but if there's any way of keeping the charge low and saving the money, that is what will happen, yes.
But that sounds like, then, it's a decision based on cost.
Well, all of these decisions are based on cost. The government likes to peddle the line. This is all about best value and coming out with taglines like that. It's not. It's the driver is cost. And they know that the legal profession is a soft target because people like your correspondent who texted in still think that the money that we get, and as I keep saying, it's this prosecution and defence, it makes us fat cats. And I think Claire's a bit underestimating, frankly, the idea that her chamber's expenses are 15%. If they are, good luck to her. But most barristers, from any fee they get, from the £200 that Max Hill talked about for a case that may have been 4 or 5 appearances, you can immediately deduct about 25 to 30% before you get to tax, if you tot it all up.
Let me bring in Bill Waddington. He's a criminal solicitor in Hull, Vice Chair of the Criminal Law Solicitors Association. Hello, Mr. Waddington.
Yeah, good morning, Victoria.
Philip has just told us that charges are kept low on the basis of cost. So somebody's charged with a more minor offence because it's cheaper to go to a magistrate's court. Do you find that acceptable?
Do I find it acceptable? No, I don't find it acceptable. I would agree wholeheartedly with what Philip has said about that, and he's mentioned daily anecdotal evidence, and we see it on a daily basis that charges are kept low in order to keep them in the magistrate's court. That can only be because it's a cheaper way of disposing of things. And, of course, let me just bring in there the fact that the amount of cautioning that's gone on now at the police stations before people, as an alternative to people being charged, the level of cautioning has increased dramatically, thus decreasing the number of people who go before even the magistrate's court.
And do you have evidence to link that to the fact that it's cheaper?
Well, evidence in so much as it is cheaper to deal with it in that way. Right. I'm not sure there's any more evidence needed than that.
And in terms of the idea of barristers not being able to afford to do the kind of work with these fixed fees, because the fixed fees have either been cut or certainly frozen for a number of years, and they have to pay their fixed costs and their own pensions and all that sort of stuff. Do you have sympathy?
We as a profession have a great deal of sympathy with the bar over this. And I know Philip mentioned that from time to time we are at each other's throats, but on issues such as this, I think we stand together, because for every cut that has taken place in fees in the bar and in the Crown Court, put against that the fact that fees haven't changed for solicitors since 1994, there have been dramatic cuts over a number of years to fees to solicitors as well. So, yes, we stand together on this one.
Right. I mean, let me put this to all of you. Another text from a listener. Perhaps you could tell your guest that the self-employed pay all their costs too. It's called running a business. How would you respond to that, Claire?
Well, yes, I know all about running a business, but the fact is that I don't think members of the public understand how much work we do, and of course they only really get to see it if they or a member of their family suddenly find themselves in need of a criminal barrister. I think if you spoke to somebody after they'd had need of a criminal barrister to represent them in court, they might have quite a different response to the points that we're raising than they have now. For example, I find it richly ironic that in the week that Rebecca Brooks, who used to be editor of tabloid newspapers, which were very fond of calling criminal barristers fat cats and running stories about how they were milking the system, and now she finds herself having been charged with an offence and appearing in court, and I don't reckon that she's going to be representing herself. Do you?
Let's bring in Francis in Liverpool, who's also a criminal barrister. Good morning, Francis.
Oh, good morning.
Yes. How do you respond to the majority view from taxpayers that, you know, why should we have sympathy with people like you?
Well, we're not fat cats, so our fees have been cut significantly over the last few years. I've certainly seen my fees go down by about 45% over the last 3 years. I'm currently on a mortgage holiday. I've had CCJs against me. Things are exceptionally tight and difficult at the junior end of the bar.
And how is that going to impact on justice in this country?
Well, justice being cut significantly. If you go into any Crown Court at the moment, there's hardly any cases coming through. Most of them are kept in the magistrates' courts. A significant number of people are given fixed penalties by the police. There are hardly any cases. Crown Courts are dead. There's just not justice there. There's not justice for the victims, and there's not justice for defendants.
Mm. And so you would agree that those kind of charges, those cautions, that those are decisions that are being made on the basis of cost alone rather than the evidence?
Cost alone, and decisions that are being made by the police. Invariably, these fixed penalties are given out by the police, and the charging decisions not even sought from the CPS. So I think there's a lot of paperwork to be filled in by the police, and they're making those decisions themselves. And when it does get through to the CPS, it's all driven by cost. Keeping magistrates keeping cases in the magistrates' courts and dealing with them as quickly as possible. Getting people to plead guilty on the first occasion, getting them sentenced on the first occasion, and invariably these people haven't even seen the evidence against them.
Philip Katz, would you accept that your profession is not very good at getting its message across?
Well, traditionally we haven't been very, very good because it's always previously been thought a little bit undignified or a bit unprofessional to talk about money. People of my generation, I've been a barrister since 1976, find this whole idea of having to talk about our money and complain about our money really quite difficult because, as I keep saying, there is strong element of vocation here. I get very angry when people go on about just running a business. What's the problem? This is not a free market. We chose to come into this profession. It was a business decision, but it was also a vocational decision, knowing our fees would be fixed. They would be lower than is available on the free market. And the important point is here, we all know we're running businesses. We all know we're self-employed. It is not a free market. We are providing legal services at the rough end, at the sharp end, and if this profession falls apart and is dismantled so carelessly, as it looks like it's very, very likely to happen if these structural changes come ahead, then the public eventually will wake up and say, why did nobody tell us about this?
Let me read some messages from other listeners. This is a text, 85058. Criminal solicitors, this is what Bill was telling us as well, have had no increase in fees since 2001. And in fact, fees have been significantly cut. These are fixed fees for taking on cases. We also have no pension. We work antisocial hours. We're always on call. And it is only when people are accused of something that they haven't done that we are appreciated. Another from Joanne in London, this is via email. Go for it. We should have had a strike years ago. I have more or less given up criminal defence law as pay is so pitiful. I can earn more in London as a tourist guide. Adele says, last year I had to go to the High Court. It was clear that the barrister did all the work advising the solicitor. The solicitor's fee was over £8,000, while the barrister's was £1,500. I was angry about this. It seemed unfair. Barry says, come off it. Why are we listening to these overpaid ex-public school pupils pleading hardship? What do you... Go on, Philip.
Public school, give it a rest. I don't know who these people think they are or who they think we are. They need a reality check. That sort of idea is a stereotype which is frankly just insulting.
So, in terms of the cuts from the Ministry of Justice, from the Department of Justice, they are underway. What hope at all do you have of changing things at this late stage?
Well, if you're asking me about my hope or my expectation, they're both pretty low. I think the profession generally is actually, as much as the cuts, we're living in a time of austerity. We know we've all got to tighten our belts, and we are, it's been said, we're not fat cats. But the other underlying real terror here of this profession, this long profession which has worked extremely hard and extremely well in the public interest, is the structural changes which this government keeps threatening us with. If those go ahead, then I'm afraid that is something which will be catastrophic, I think, for most people at the independent bar.
And those structural changes that they're threatening, what are they, briefly?
Well, essentially, they want to change the way the provision of legal aid is supplied around the country. This is on the defence side. On the defence side, they want to reduce, the government wants to contract with fewer people, and they want us all to get together, bid, rather like GPs' practices, but this is not a free market. We have no experience of this type of contract tendering. We're getting more of it as time goes along, but the fact of the matter is it's not about quality. It should be. It's all about cost. Those two things are not necessarily achievable at the same time.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Sorry, did somebody want to say something else there?
Well, I was just going to say I agree entirely with what Philip said then, because the big stick at the end of all of this is the concept of competitive tendering, which has absolutely nothing at all to do with quality, experience, whatever. That is all about the lowest price. And where price is the only thing that's going to be taken into account and not quality, there's only one thing that's going to suffer from that, and that is the concept of justice, for which we all fight on a daily basis.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Your views are very welcome. 0500 909 693. Tell us what you think about the prospect of criminal barristers balloting for strike action in protest at the cuts that they are facing. Tell us particularly if you have either been prosecuted or defended and you feel that decisions have been made on cost. Perhaps you work for the police or the CPS. You can talk anonymously, of course. Give us your own pertinent examples. 0500 909 693. Let's bring you some weather now for today and the weekend. Here's Louise.